Okay, folks, it's 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name's Brooke Alford. I'm with the Indiana Native Plant Society in the Central Chapter, and I'm also with Purdue Extension in Marion County, and they host these virtual presentations on Zoom. I'm an urban ag and natural resource educator there. But tonight we have Lisa Milton with us from Newfields to talk about leaf management. And I've asked Lisa just to take a couple minutes before she gets started with her presentation to tell us a little bit about herself. So Lisa, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, definitely. So I'm Lisa Milton. I am the manager of natural resources for Newfields. If you are unfamiliar with Newfields, it is a multicultural campus that includes the Virginia B. Fairbanks Art and Nature Park, which is what I manage, as well as a one of the largest art museums in the country and many historical sites and a gardens at beautiful gardens. So I have my background is in environmental science. That's what I have my master's in. I'm also the White River co-chair for reconnecting to our waterways, and I'm on the board of directors for Friends of the White River. Um, I've been a gardener my entire life, and native plants are really my passion. So I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm going to keep this a little high level. Hopefully I have some new information for you all. So once again, Newfields, our mission at Newfields is to enrich lives through exceptional experiences with art and nature. So many people may be curious why the art museum would be presenting on this topic, and this is why. Because nature is integral to the mission of the organization, and 100 of our 152 acres we manage as natural lands, which means invasive species management and managing native gardens for the benefit of pollinators and birds. So we're going to talk primarily about two main concepts. One being leave the leaves and why that's important, and a few tips on how to keep your neighbors happy while doing that. Being a combination of a natural space and also having a garden, we've been we understand how to manage for aesthetics while also managing for the natural aspects of the landscape. And the second is saving the stems. And we'll get more into that and why that's important here in a little while. So leaving the leaves. Leaving the leaves is critical for nutrients and soil health, habitat, and to create a natural mulch. It's also really important for carbon capture and waste reduction, and has clean water implications, both positive and negative. And we'll talk about that as well. So nutrients and soil health. Leaving organic matter on site increases water retention by increasing the pores in the soil. It has pH and nutrient buffering characteristics. It improves the cation exchange and tilth. So you can imagine, many of you are familiar with the concepts of using compost in your gardens and how mixing all of that in makes it easier to plant in and easier to move through the soil. And that's the same for the plants that use the soil. It provides food for microorganisms, and it increases nutrients through chemical processes, including the organic matter decomposition. Organic matter decomposition results in organic acids that bind to iron and aluminum ions in the soil, which means that those toxic heavy metals that can cause toxicity to plants become less free in the soil. And as the organic acids bind with those ions, it often results in more accessible phosphate, which would otherwise be bound to the iron and aluminum ions, which can benefit terrestrial plants, can benefit aquatic plants, and can also cause increased eutrophication within our natural waterways. So we're all familiar with this view. In a forest, we see leaves fall and we expect them to stay, and we're familiar with the natural humus. If you're not, as you walk through the forest, if you ever pick up soil from the forest, it's very fluffy, it's very dark, and it's because of all of the decomposed leaves that are allowed to stay in place and not be cleaned up. Being a gardener my entire life, I have years and years and years of experience of cleaning up these leaves and then putting non-organic fertilizers on plants to try to increase that nutrient, the need for nutrients by the plants. So what we're going to talk about is how to use these leaves as an organic fertilizer, and also why it's so critical to organisms within our landscapes. So what happens under the soil when you leave these leaves on the site is that they churn through the soil. Both fungi and microorganisms and macroinvertebrates, which is insects, gastropods, like worms, etc., help to move those organic nutrients through the soil and creates these natural horizons. The organic layer is the humus that you find in the forest floor, the very top layer. It's also often called leaf mold when you leave leaves to decompose. It's not quite compost, it's leaf mold. Compost has more nitrogen in it than leaf mold. Leaf mold is just the carbon leaves compounded together. And the fungi that form in those clusters. Secondarily is the A horizon, the surface layer where the subsoils and the organic matter are mixed together through microbial processes and through macroinvertebrate movement in the soil. And then, of course, you have the substratum and bedrock. So this is what healthy soil looks like. If you put a shovel into the soil in your yard, this is what it should look like. You should have a thick, dark layer toward the top where you have organic matter. And then as you get further down, you should get your more natural based soils that are closer to your bedrock. Often that's not what we have. Often, especially in very manicured environments where we clean the leaves up, you get clay and sand almost immediately as soon as you dig. I know in my own yard, even though I live in a riparian area, I live really close to the river. If you dig in the lawn part of my yard where leaves have continuously been removed, the soil is very hard, very sandy, and it's hard to get anything to grow in there that isn't used to compacted soils.
Lisa, while we're on this slide,
Yes,
could I just ask you a question real quick?
absolutely.
I think it's the C layer, the kind of golden layer, we see some brown stripes in there. Do you think those are most likely earthworm tunnels where organic matter's been brought down from the top?
Yes, that's my understanding. Is it's from roots and from earthworms and from other like as I said, macroinvertebrates moving through the soil. So that's
Okay.
There's some movement by there's a lot of movement by macroinvertebrates, by earthworms, and then some movement just by the movement of roots and fungi through the soil as well.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to point that out because I think that that's really important to see how that organic matter is being brought down by all those different vectors.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no, not at all. So habitat, and we'll go back to some of the cycling in the soil here in a moment as we talk about carbon cycling. But habitat is really, leaving the leaves is really incredibly critical for the habitat of invertebrates and vertebrates. So if you're not familiar, invertebrates is anything with an exoskeleton or a lack of a skeleton. And vertebrates obviously are going to be anything with an endoskeleton. So We all are familiar with if you take a scoop of leaves, you're going to find bugs inside of it, and those bugs are really critical food sources for things like turtles and birds, and they're the basis of the food web in a lot of ways for our ecosystem to function. This is a picture of leaf mold compost. This is what happens to all of the leaves on the main garden, on the main Newfields campus. Gardens, they dump all of the leaves into a pile in a forested area and let them to create leaf mold. And then we use that as a mulch on our gardens. We use some of it in the park, and a lot of it's used in the gardens as compost, as an organic fertilizer for the plants in the more manicured gardens primarily. And this helps support the nutrient cycles within those gardens. It allows those gardens to be completely organically managed without they use fertilizers on the lawns, but not in the gardens themselves. And it creates a healthier, balanced soil composition in the gardens. It's also really critical for ground nesting and for bees and insects that overwinter in the soil. So mulch, if you use especially thick layers of woody mulch, prohibit insects from reaching the bare soil that they need to overwinter. And they often don't survive the winter if they're trying to nest in areas that are fully lawn with hard soils, or that are covered in mulch. So using leaves as a natural mulch allows insects to go into the soil and overwinter, as 70% of native bees, which are critical to our spring blooms, especially the earlier spring blooms are primarily pollinated by native bees rather than honeybees. It's also critical habitat for things like native snakes, small mammals, turtles, anything you can think of that's very small and lives on or in the ground relies on leaf litter and detritus for natural habitat. So how can we use leaves as mulch in our gardens? If you leave 3 to 6 inches of natural leaf mulch on your garden, it can act the exact same as the mulch that you buy from the store. It has all of the benefits of regular mulch. It has weed suppression. The seeds of weeds don't get enough light to germinate when they're covered in leaves. And it acts exactly the same as mulch would to prevent erosion, to suppress weeds, and to retain water. It has additional benefits of added nutrients that mulches that you buy from the store don't always naturally have. And obviously the habitat that I mentioned before. Just like with regular mulch, you don't want to volcano your plants. You don't want to smother your plants. You don't want more than 6 inches of this leaf litter mulch on your garden beds. But you definitely want at least 3 inches for it to work properly. This is what we do in the park. If in some areas where there's a lot of foot traffic, we use mulched up honeysuckle or downed branches as mulch. But in a lot of our beds, we make sure that they have enough leaves to cover so that we don't get the weed germination. And it's really critical to understand not to till your leaves into the soil because it causes a nutrient imbalance and allows nitrogen not to be available to plants because you get too much of a carbon sink in the soils. So here you can see a bed that we've used leaves as mulch. You can see the plants are still growing through it because we didn't do too thick, but it fully covers the soil that would otherwise be bare and prohibits all of the negative aspects of having bare soil in a garden. Here is some polygonatum. These leaves are relatively thick. It's probably 10 inches of leaves, but this is a really strong plant that can grow through this level of leaf leaf mulch. These are woodland plants that are adapted to growing through thick layers of mulch. And in this case, it's perfectly fine to have that many leaves in this area. So how do you prevent, if you go through all of the work of blowing or raking your leaves onto your garden, how do you prevent them from going into your neighbor's yard and getting complaints, or into the grass that you've just cleared? And my suggestion is to use a snow fence or chicken wire or some kind of protective barrier where the wind can get through, but the leaves can't. It prohibits the leaves from going where you don't want them to. And it also helps create sort of a fence to prevent new seeds of weeds to come into your garden. So it helps to protect your garden. And it also helps to protect your neighbors' gardens from your leaves, or protect your lawn from gathering leaves and having to do the work over and over and over again. Different leaves decompose at different rates. And so here is a picture of primarily cottonwood leaves, which decompose very quickly, and some sycamores that have a little bit more of a waxy cuticle. As a rule, the thicker the leaf and the glossier it is, so the thicker the waxy cuticle on the leaf is, the slower it decomposes. So depending on what species of tree you have in your yard, you may want to remove those leaves entirely and compost them separately, or you may be perfectly happy to move those onto your garden bed. I like to use a nice mix of different species in my leaf mulches, but there are a lot of species that I completely avoid. So here's a short list, and there are more. You don't want to use juglin species. So black walnut or butternut secrete juglone, which is a chemical that prohibits the growth of other plants. So you don't want to blow all of your walnut leaves onto your garden where you're trying to grow other plants. I suspect this is the case for Linicera as well. That's why I included it. Linicera is honeysuckle. You don't want to deliberately mulch your beds with honeysuckle, I would think, but I don't actually know that to be the case. I just included it here because it is also allelopathic, and I wouldn't want to suggest that you do that. American beech. When I was in graduate school, we did just a learning study of the decomposition rate of American beech, and I believe it was white ash. We put isopods in containers and monitored them for 2 weeks, and the difference was so stark because American beech has a very thick waxy cuticle that the isopods weren't able to cut through, and they didn't eat much of the leaves over the course of the study relative to the ash, which doesn't have the waxy cuticle. So if you mulch your bed with American beech, it would take more than a year's time to decompose in your garden, unlike other species. Magnolia is the same way. It's very thick, has a very waxy cuticle. This picture on the left is cucumber magnolia leaves. We allow them to stay in our garden beds, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest breaking them onto your garden and expecting them to go away within a year. Ginkgo is one that I would suggest completely removing from your garden. They have very thick, leathery leaves. They will kill your grass. They will create, if you have any of the fruit, it will create a terrible smell. But the leaves will create a thick barrier that a lot of plants can't grow through. So here's a picture of walnut. You can see that the leaves do decompose relatively quickly. but they have these tannins and they have juglone, and you don't necessarily want them in your gardens. I had one of my employees suggested raking up all the walnuts and dyeing clothing with. So that's one great use for them. Or obviously eating the walnuts themselves, but using them as mulch is not necessarily ideal. So how do you maintain a lawn with this in mind? Here you can see we have some garden beds where we have covered them in the leaves that were once on the lawn. To do that, we as an organization, just due to time constraints, which is true for a lot of park spaces everywhere I've worked commercially, uses backpack blowers. And I joked with a colleague that I'm going to make enemies on this because there are so many reasons not to use backpack blowers and very few to use backpack blowers. And the one reason to use them in my mind is time constraints and a lack of just needing more employees for the amount of land that we have to manage. And so there are some electric alternatives, and they finally caught up to the gas powered blowers. It still takes time to change all of your equipment to electric now that electric has caught up. So I just, as a land manager, ask people to be sympathetic to that we're trying, that we do care, and we're trying, and we're going to make the shift. It just takes a little bit of time, but a backpack blower will clear this grass a lot faster than rakes. Obviously, in your own homes, I would suggest using rakes or an electric alternative. But another really good alternate, especially for lawn spaces, and to introduce those leaves to the lawn as fertilizer, is mulching. So you can turn a lawn that looks like this into something that looks like this very easily by mulching it with your mower. Some mowers are built to mulch, which essentially just means they have a flap on them that closes over the outlet, which allows them to return the leaves multiple times. I, in the past, have gathered leaves from hardscapes, put them onto grass deliberately, piled them up, run it over with a mower several times to mulch that up. One of the problems with this is you often kill the insects that are using those leaves. So if you clear up a garden space, because you don't want those leaves to deteriorate on your garden space or on your hardscape, and put them onto an area and mow them over, you're very likely killing insects that are beneficial to your gardens. So I prefer to move the leaves onto the garden bed, and then to mulch what really just remains toward the end of the season onto my lawn, but that's just a personal preference. Depends on how many leaves you have and how much you care about maintaining the insect population in your garden. So I wanted to talk a little bit about carbon capture and waste reduction. So here you can see some exposed roots and bare soil. And what happens in this kind of situation is that the fungi that the plants rely on for the nutrient cycle, for the carbon cycle, aren't protected. The carbon cycle and carbon capture in the soil is benefited by leaf litter, because if the leaf litter protects the fungi, which then move throughout the soil to move toward the sequestered carbon that's being released from the plant's roots. So the plants sequester carbon out of the atmosphere and release it into the soil through the roots. And the fungi move through the soil and cycle and cause aggregation within the soil, which then allows the roots to grow faster. And it's a whole cycle of the fungi, which are protected by the leaf layer, as well as the microbes in the soil. The protection of the leaf layer allows those to do their job within the soil and cause aggregation, which then allows the roots to further grow, which then allows additional carbon to be captured within the soil, which is really beneficial for our gardens and not very beneficial for the landfill. So included this picture to show we are taking this natural fertilizer that benefits our soils in all of these ways and benefits our gardens. Apologies for my dog. And throwing it into bagging it up, throwing it in plastic. Give me 1 second. Throwing it in plastic and then throwing it into landfill where it doesn't do anything to benefit us as a society. It causes more carbon monoxide. So rather than being a carbon sink, is a source of atmospheric carbon. So leaving the leaves on the ground benefits clean water through a few things. It reduces the overland flow, which then obviously reduces the nutrients and chemicals that run off into the soil. So if you're not familiar with overland flow, it's when it rains, water is either infiltrated into the soil, if the soil allows it to do that, or if we have really hard soils that act somewhat like concrete or other impervious surfaces, if we allow our soils to become impervious due to a lack of organic matter, then the water just runs over the soil, bringing any kind of chemical component or nutrients into the waterways, which then causes all kinds of nutrient issues in our natural bodies of water. So I know I mentioned earlier the release of organic acids through leaf decomposition allows phosphorus to be present in the soil, which can benefit terrestrial plants. But terrestrial plants specifically rely on nitrogen. Nitrogen is the limiting nutrient in terrestrial systems. Phosphorus is the limiting nutrient in aquatic systems, which means that aquatic eutrophication, so the overabundance of life in the water, can only occur in the excess of phosphorus. So if phosphorus is allowed to leach into the soil through overland flow, through water not infiltrating into the soil well enough, it can cause things like algae blooms, which are really dangerous to aquatic life and to human health. A reduction in overland flow through the use or through the increase in organic matter in our soils also reduces floods and droughts, which are related, because the more water we lose to our rivers, the less we have in the soils. So it creates flash floods downstream and creates droughts over a longer period of time. And obviously soil erosion is an issue for our terrestrial plants and for our aquatic systems, because losing excess soil and losing excess soil into the natural bodies of water can also cause nutrient issues and imbalances, but causes turbidity and a danger to our aquatic life as well. It's really critical to leave leaves on ground and not to leave leaves on impervious surfaces. So for these reasons. So it's really critical to clean your storm drains and your gutters. A USGS study in 2016 found that up to 56% of the annual phosphorus in urban stormwater was due to organic matter decomposition in storm drains. They found that, they found that 56% of that could be accounted for if they just swept the streets, or it was 56% to 16%. So it's really critical. It has a huge impact on the urban stormwater nutrient loading, just to clean the streets and to clean the gutters. So we can all take apart and clean the storm sewers in front of our houses and clean our gutters and reduce that phosphorus loading, which then causes all kinds of algae bloom issues and issues to our aquatic systems. So the other huge part of how to maintain our gardens in the winter to benefit the ecosystem that we're trying to proliferate within our own yards is saving the stems. I highlighted habitat here because saving the stems has all of the same implications as leaving the leaves, but the primary function of this is habitat. It's best to wait. Here you can see this picture is obviously in the fall. It's best to wait till the spring to cut down any stems that you don't want to be in your garden. And we're going to talk about why that is. So I mentioned 70% of bees overwinter in the ground, 30% of bees overwinter in hollow stems. If this means that if you need to cut back the stems for if they're unsightly or if they're causing some sort of issue, it's best to cut them 8 to 24 inches above the ground and no less than 4 inches from a branch or stem node. Native bees will burrow into these stems and hibernate over the winter in sections that they will encapsulate by themselves. You can often tell if a bee is inhabited a hollow stem because they actually create their own cap over that stem. So here you can see if you have a native garden and it looks like this in the winter, you may feel inclined to do some winter cleaning. And that would be my suggestion, would be to trim only what you absolutely feel you need to, but to leave the seed heads and most of the stems up for bees. There could actually be some benefit to trimming some of the seed heads off to allow that hollow stem to be more obvious and open for the bees that need a space to hibernate. So if you do prune selectively and primarily leave them up, birds obviously can use the seeds throughout the season. What we do at the Virginia Beach Fairbanks Art Nature Park at Newfields is we leave the seed heads up through the winter. Don't cut them down until mid-spring. It's best to say around the time that you would first mow your lawn is the earliest that you should cut down the stems in your garden. Here you can see some rudbeckia that early spring, we had Chelsea chopped some of these to keep the others up. So we will maintain the ones that are cut in half there on the left throughout the spring next year and use it sort of as a natural stake while also promoting the insects that use this space. There are some plants that are really obviously beneficial and have hollow stems, like the Eutrochium and Silphium perfoliatum, the plants that have really large hollow stems that everyone knows are large hollow stems. But this is Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. Monarda fistulosa also has hollow stems. So some of the smaller bees can really benefit from leaving smaller stems that are also hollow up throughout the winter. So this is the Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. I included this so you can see some seed heads are really beautiful. And if you plan ahead in your garden, you can plan so that you have these beautiful seed heads that are more of a winter interest rather than a deterrence to the beauty of your garden. You can see the solidago and the sargassum in this picture are really beautiful this time of year. And the seed heads of these species can really contribute to the beauty of your garden rather than detract from it. It's really important to leave grasses as well. A lot of insects lay their eggs on grasses and these thick mats of grasses. This is beak grass, but little blue stems, Kazakarium. I always say that wrong. But a lot of grasses have very specific needs for pollinators. I suggest looking at the Xerces Society. They have a really great resource for what uses each native plant and why you should leave different species up throughout the year in your garden. It's also really important to leave wood piles. So where a lot of bees overwinter in the ground, they often look for areas that are protected. So they look for areas within wood piles or under wood piles to do their hibernation. So this is the beginnings of a very large hugelculture that we've started. So this will eventually be a garden. We're going to add a couple more branches to make it look a little bit prettier and put it will have ferns and other native shade loving plants.
Lisa, I just have to interrupt you to say that I adore this.
Oh, thank you.
Great. This hugelculture bed is going to be fantastic. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. I'm
just
no,
not at all.
Excited.
We're close to the end here. This is a picture of the Wildberries Unlimited Native Pollinator Meadow, which I've been showing images of last spring. And here I wanted to show, I think we cut it down a little bit far, but you can see if you look really closely that we left all of the stems on site. So we waited until everything was about knee height and then cut it down, maybe a little bit too close to the ground. This year, I think we'll leave the at least 8 inches of stems. In some places, the stems got nearly cut off to the ground. But we left everything on site so that if anything was living in those stems, they remained on site. They can emerge and still proliferate in our gardens and benefit the ecosystem, benefit the birds and the plants that we're trying to support in the system. So as a conclusion, it's really important to plan ahead in your garden. If you have the benefit of planting, if you're starting from scratch, plant trees that you would want to use as mulch in your gardens now. Use leaves as natural mulch on your garden beds as much as possible. It saves you money, and it also has all of the benefits of a store-bought mulch, while also having the added benefits that we've mentioned in this presentation. Mulch your leaves into your lawn areas rather than breaking them up and removing them. Move them onto your gardens, into your compost pile, or mulch them into the grass. Use fences or other barriers to keep the area neat and to benefit your neighbors. Leave attractive seed heads standing for the benefit of the birds and also to make your garden more beautiful. If you need to cut back any of your stems, cut them 8 to 24 inches above the ground, 4 to 6 inches from branches or stems. Leave grasses and woody debris on site. Leave leaves and stems on site in the spring, so you're not removing all of those pollinators and all of the benefits from your site as soon as you clean up your bed in the spring. And obviously compost what you can't use as mulch in your gardens. So, questions?
Thank you, Lisa, so much. Can we give Lisa a virtual round of applause for that, please? That was a wealth of information. and we really appreciate it. Yes, we do have a lot of questions. I'm going to start at the end and work back. We had a few questions about the wood pile and hugelkultur. Would you mind discussing that just a little bit more? The practice of hugelkultur, I believe it's started in Germany.
Yes, it started in Germany, and it is essentially using the natural decomposition of wood as a basis of your garden. So it's the act of piling a bunch of old and decomposing wood, using a little bit of organic matter and soil on top of that, and then it creates a nice, really organic, rich soil to benefit your garden. There is some concern with nitrogen availability within that garden, so you have to be selective of what plants you use. But it is it's an ancient German practice, and we have we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah, well, I think we're all going to follow really closely. If you didn't see it, I put the word hugelkultur, and I believe I spelled it correctly in the chats. And you can Google this and find out a lot more information. I on a beautiful sunny day in the middle of January, decided it was time to start a hugelkultur bed in my backyard. And this is not what I teach in class. You are to plan ahead before you ever put a shovel on the ground, okay? But it was January, and I desperately needed to be outside. And so I used different diameters of wood. I used some of my vermicompost. I used soil, and I used leaves. And it's similar to lasagna gardening, but it's got that basis of wood. And to counteract that high carbon release from the woody material, I did use the vermicompost, but I also planted green beans the first year, which are a nitrogen fixer. So that's a really good point, Lisa. Thank you for pointing that out, because we sometimes forget to do that. Because I also used arborist chips as well, and that's really high carbon. And so I did. I think I added some bone meal as well to offset that carbon, and planted the green beans for that fixation. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So hugelkultur, go Google it and have fun doing it. It's a great way to take down if you have a slash pile in the back, or if you've had a tree taken down or something. You can have that wood cut up into smaller segments and build a great, beautiful bed out of that. It's an amazing soil health building practice. Pam says, I also call it stumpery, and I'm working to build one with logs and tree slices, adding fern and wildflowers. That's awesome. Thank you, Pam. Amy says, I've heard advice to leave cut stems in the garden so that insects can stay in their homes. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Pam also asked, does the grass labyrinth still exist?
It does. It's somewhat overgrown. We're going to try a prescribed burn on it this year and see if that helps with some of the overgrowth that we're getting. My kids love it, and their parents don't necessarily love it right now because it flops in and the kids feel lost. The parents may think it's a bit overgrown, is been my experience. So we're going to prescribe burn it and see what that does. But yes, it still very much exists.
Cool, thank you. Nancy asked earlier on, you mentioned some plants that have a hollow stem. Can you tell us what the common names of the plants are?
Oh yeah, Joe Pye. I'm trying to think of what all I mentioned. Joe Pye was the eutrochium that I mentioned. Pokeweed has hollow stems. Mountain mint. This is awful. My brain goes to scientific.
That's okay, Lisa. I would recommend what I'm going to do is
wild bergamot.
Oh, thank you. Wild bergamot. Okay. I'm gonna go cut some stems in my garden and find out which ones are hollow and which aren't. So,
Yeah,
um,
goldenrods also. Goldenrods,
goldenrods.
hollow
What
stems,
what about
um,
compass plants? Somebody asks.
compost plants.
Compass plants. I
Oh,
can't
compass plant.
remember that
Yes,
genus
yeah,
right now.
yes. I said Silphium perfoliatum. Yes,
Okay.
that is cup plant. But yes, the all of the Silphiums, the compass plant, um, prairie dock, those all have hollow stems as well.
Okay. Nancy also says common milkweed has hollow stems too. Rebecca asks, should I worry about using leaf mulch? I'm not sure. Oh, deep leaf mulch, maybe.
I think there are some plants that are really susceptible um uh to over mulching. So I think just around certain species that are a little bit more tender, don't mulch as thick. But other species, like I mentioned, like the Sullivan seal can grow really well through thick leaf mulch. So just be aware of what species you're mulching around. I I wouldn't pile up 2 feet of leaf litter onto my garden unless I was positive that all those species would come up through it.
So Rebecca asked, do prairie plants do well if mulched with leaves?
Yes.
Yes. And Ruth Ann asks, so if I find that stems of tall plants are not hollow, may I cut them down in the fall in good conscience?
I always, if it's a native plant, I like to let everything use the seeds. If you're saving the seeds, I think you can, in relatively good conscience, cut it down. Um, Once again, I would put it on a compost rather than throw it in the trash.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Pam said she donated Big Blue Slim to Chandler when he built it. Thank you, Pam. Um, oh, Shirley asked a couple questions. She asked to please identify plants suitable for hugelkultur areas, and that's any plant. You really just want to think about that carbon nitrogen balance, correct, Lisa?
Correct.
Okay. I know I missed some. Excuse me while I scroll here. Hugelkultur. Oh, Shirley shared a question with me, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Lisa, because this is going to be a long process in our municipality. It's my understanding, she says, that local garbage collectors require leaves, etc., to be in black plastic bags rather than the large paper ones. It seems environmentally counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
Any efforts to reverse this regulation? While you're thinking, I will say that there are a few haulers, private haulers in Indianapolis who will haul compost materials like food scraps and I believe leaves as well from businesses and residents. And you might want to look into that. Just look for Indianapolis organic waste haulers.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know that there is a desire by several members of our um, several influential people within our city and within some of our cultural institutions to try to develop a citywide composting plan. So I think if enough people show that we want this as a city, that we'll get there.
And thank you. With that, I would add that, if this is something you'd like to see, please let your elected officials know that you would like to have curbside pickup that does not happen in plastic bags. So like a third bin, similar to your recycling bin, I spent many years in the Pacific Northwest in the city of Seattle, and that's what we did. We had three bins. We had garbage, recycling, and clean green. And often people would have extra cans for when there was a lot of extra leaf litter and that sort of thing. Granted, it was an evergreen state. This is deciduous, so there's a lot more, but I think it's very possible. But I do think that our elected officials need to hear that there's a strong desire for this and to do away with plastic bagged leaves. That's just so ridiculous.
Yes.
Anything to add to that part of the discussion, Lisa, while I'm looking through questions?
I wish I had more to add. I
That's
know
okay.
the Office
Not
of
necessary.
Sustainability is really interested in doing something about it, and that when we as a campus decided to try to find a solution, that they've made some really good suggestions on how to move forward. So I think that I'm optimistic that we'll have a good answer to this in the next 5 to 10 years as a society or as a city.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. I did find another question, and Shirley asked, don't till leaves into the ground never, or is it okay to do so in the spring after using it as mulch through the winter?
It's something that I have personally tilled leaves into my garden without there being an issue in the past. But it's something that I read recently about it causing a nutrient imbalance, and I found it really intriguing. And I'm not a soil scientist by any means, so I think I would do a little bit of research myself before being able to really answer that question fully.
I believe, and I'm not a soil scientist either, but I believe once they're partially decomposed, then that carbon nitrogen balance isn't so out of whack. And, it's pretty much become leaf mold, which you can incorporate into the soil. Does that sound
That sounds right to
reasonable?
me.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know that, for some community gardens, we use some of the free leaf mulch that's made available by different municipalities, and I think it works out pretty well. There might be a little bit of garbage in it, but it's free and it's worked out. Debbie asked, what about pine needles? This is a hard one for me.
Yeah, for me too. I have successfully used pine needles as a mulch around other evergreens, and they have worked as a mulch and not caused any kind of imbalance. I wouldn't suggest using pine needles around plants that, um, I don't know. I used to buy pine straw when I did private estates. And this was years and years and years ago. And there were certain beds that I would use it around things like azaleas because they were also under a pine tree, and I never had any issues. There's an acidity, but I don't know. As long as you're not, I wouldn't throw pine needles in my compost, but I think as long as you're using it as a mulch so that it's the same sort of protective layer for everything that happens underneath the soil, I personally haven't had an issue using it.
That's a good point, Lisa, because azaleas do like acid soil. So that's something to think about. Thank you. Thanks. Let's see. It looks like something else came in from Judith. Do you ever need to do anything with the leaf mulch or just let it stay and then let the new leaves gather on top with the next autumn?
Um, I think you can do either. You can turn it, or you can let them decompose. Some of it depends on species. And you may be able to speak to this as well. But I think if as long as the leaf doesn't have a heavy waxy cuticle that's going to prevent things from growing up through it, I don't know that there's anything that you need to do. It'd be just like regular mulch where you can just
Mm-hmm.
let it pile up and it decomposes and just adds to the nutrient layer, just like it would
Yeah, that's a
before.
great point. That's like that picture you showed of that organic layer. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just put a little plug in here when we're talking about that really rich organic layer and how important that is for our gardens and for our woodlands. We have found Asian jumping worms to be a problem in our state. They're here and they are voracious eaters of these organic layers. But unlike our red wigglers or other earthworms, when they eat our organic matter and then they excrete it in their poop, those nutrients are actually bound up and they're not available to plants versus a red wiggler composting worm that makes that very available. And so that's making our areas more susceptible to invasion by other invasive plant species as well, who don't need that available nutrients, unlike our native plants that have evolved here with that organic layer. So that's just something to think about in your management of that organic layer, is if you can just educate yourself on the Asian jumping worm. And if you'd like more information about how to do that, you can go to the INPS website and just search Asian jumping worms. And we've got a best practices document, and it's mainly geared towards testing your soil for Asian jumping worms with a hot mustard test, and then best practices for donating plants. We're in plant sale season right now, and we are asking everybody who is donating plants to our INPS Central Chapter plant sale that is going to be next Saturday from 10 to 2, I believe, to follow these best practices if they're going to donate. And if they don't have time, probably just don't donate this year, and maybe think about starting more plants from seeds in sterile soils, so you're not moving materials off of your land that might have these worms or their cocoons in them. And Amy asks, oh, where to find the test? You can go on the INPS website, and we have a document for best practices there. And then in that document, because I pulled it together and asked, I had some lovely people edit it for me. I included all the references that I used for that. And also Bob Bruner is an entomologist at Purdue Extension, and his contact information is there as well. If you have further questions, this is not my expertise, but it is becoming his. There's still a lot we don't know. This is fairly new in Indiana. Wisconsin, it was found in 2013. But we're still trying to figure that out. So again, you can find that at the INPS, the Indiana Native Plant Society website. You could just Google Indiana Native Plant Society and Asian jumping worms and find it there. Oh yeah, Rebecca said she can say from experience that pine needles do not prevent the growth of a myrrh honeysuckle. I believe that.
Yep.
I believe that. We had several questions tonight, and I think, Lisa, you already answered this, but I want to make sure that we get your impression on this. Shredding or not shredding, people had a lot of questions. Is it okay to shred? In my opinion, leaving them whole is like the best practice, the best habitat. Sometimes people do need to shred given how many leaves they have, and we understand that. And that's okay. I'd say that's maybe like number 2 or 3, and you definitely can do that as a management. Just understand that it might lower your population of beneficial insects. Would you say that's right, Lisa?
I would say that's right. I would say 1 is use them as mulch on your garden beds, 2 is compost them, and 3 is shred them, would be my order.
Okay. Sounds good to me. Thank you. I think we've made it through all of the questions. Let me just check. I did take a bathroom break at one point. Yep, I think we've addressed any, but everybody feel welcome to unmute yourself and ask any final questions before it's 8 o'clock. So I give us 1 minute more. Going, and gone. Lisa, thank you so much for being here tonight. This was a wealth of information. I know I've taken away some new facts here, and I know it'll help me better explain this materials to others in the future also. Thank you. That was extremely thorough and well shared.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Lisa, are we on for seed collection at Newfields on November 4th? Did we decide?
Yes, we are. Yes, everyone, if you're interested, come join us. We have a pollinator meadow of 93 native species. If you haven't seen it, it's beautiful. It was designed by Kevin Tungesvik. And we are going to do a seed collection event on November 4th and a workshop with Brooke, New Extension Native Plant Society, to show you how to start those plants, but we'll also just give you a positive identification on the plants, the seeds that you're collecting, and you can take them or you can give them to us. It's up to you. So
I think it's going to be a great event. So we're going to do the seed collection and we're going to do some propagation, right?
Yep.
Container propagation that people can take home.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Are we making a registration link for that, or can folks just show up?
People can show up. We will also have, I believe we may have a registration link, just so we get an idea of numbers, but you can definitely just show up. We'll have pre-made plant labels, packets for people to take.
Well, what time are we starting? I forgot.
I think it's 10 a.m.
Great. Perfect. I like that. This time of year, you need to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Saturday, November 4th at 10 a.m.
Yes.
We'll do some native plant identification in the pollinator meadow at Newfields, and then we'll do some propagation as well. You can take some home with you if you like.
Yep.
All right. Thanks again, Lisa. It's been really great tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Good night, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.